Greetings, mortals! I am the BookTube Goddess, the #1 drag queen booktuber on YouTube. I've been noticing a trend in adult sci-fi, and maybe I am late to the party on this, but a lot of what's being published seems to be novellas. Yes, novellas. Now, the official definition of a novella is fiction between 20 and 40,000 words. Anything longer is a novel, and anything shorter is a short story. Well, that's not quite right. There's also something called a novelette, which is between a short story and a novella, traditionally between 8,000 and 20,000 words. Anyway, I've recently read 2 science fiction novellas that were really well done, and I want to talk about them. But first, let's recognize that science fiction, as opposed to fantasy, has had a long history of embracing short forms of fiction. This makes sense when you look at the origins of science fiction coming from the pulp magazines, which started way back in the 30s and 40s. In fact, most science fiction authors back then cut their teeth on short stories because they could make more money selling short stories than novels. It was the age of the Galaxy magazine, astounding stories, amazing stories, and weird tales. And at their height, they would purchase tons of short stories or novellas, or sometimes serialized novels. So an author could maybe sell a short story and get $100 or whatever, or spend a year writing a novel and sell it for $500. So economically, it made more sense to focus on short stories. Now, the point is that if you look back at the Heinleins and the Clarks and the Asimovs and the Bradburys, they wrote tons of short stories or had their work serialized in pulp magazines. Heck, even Frank Herbert's Dune started in a pulp magazine. But the era of the pulp magazines has died out, though there's still a few existing today. But since the 70s and 80s, novels became the de facto form that most people consume science fiction. But something seems to have happened recently. There are novellas getting some good traction. And I've bought a few myself, not even knowing that I was buying a novella. And I think it has to do with the fact that we're purchasing ebooks. I don't look at page counts on ebooks. I mostly just read the blurb or look at the cover. And I don't have a physical copy in my hand where I can see how thick or thin the book is. Since ebooks don't distinguish between a novel and a novella, it's easy to purchase a novella thinking it's a novel. And I don't really have a problem with that, but it does kind of irk me that there's no difference in price. Recently, I paid $10 thinking I was getting a novel and ended up getting a novella, which took me a very short time to read. Whereas I could have gotten a lengthy epic for the same price and had reading material for a week or several weeks or whatever. I don't know what to think of that. Let me know what you think in the comments. And while you're there, please like this video and subscribe if you aren't subscribed already. Now, I like supporting authors by purchasing their books. And I know that most authors struggle financially unless they have a secondary form of income, so it's hard for me to begrudge an author for making bank on novellas. They're faster to write, obviously, and if novels are in any way popular, it's kind of neat that it's another form of income. That said, I don't understand why publishers charge just as much for a novella as a novel. It makes no sense to me. Actually, the whole ebook pricing scheme makes no sense to me. In the old days when ebooks first came out, they were much cheaper than books. In fact, they were considered kind of a novelty, and authors got large royalties, or a large percentage on their royalties on ebooks. Nowadays, of course, publishers know the value of ebooks and milk them for whatever it's worth. I think that authors only make like 25-30% on an ebook, and that's after Amazon or whoever takes their cut. Anyway, authors, I think, should at least be getting 50% on ebooks because there is no overhead. There's no printers to pay, no materials, or there's no competition for shelving space in bookstores. You just drop in a PDF and rake in the bucks. And for readers like me who don't really even know they're purchasing a novella, we're just completely oblivious and pay the same price as for a novel, and it just really confuses me. Let me know what you think in the comments. Anyway, sorry about that. I didn't mean to go on such a long tangent. I really just wanted to highlight 2 science fiction novellas. Oh, and for those who say fantasy and science fiction need to be long because of world building, I hope the success of novellas puts that at rest. Not to mention the long-ass history of short-form speculative fiction. Okay, so let's keep on track. The first science fiction novella is All Systems Red by Martha Wells, the first in her stories about Murderbot. Martha Wells is a veteran science fiction author who I've been a fan of for a long time and who has won quite a few awards. In fact, All Systems Red won the Hugo, Nebula, and Locus Awards, maybe more. But who specifically is Murderbot? Murderbot is a robot or an android or possibly a cyborg. It's not quite clear what Murderbot is, but it has escaped its programming parameters and is fully sentient. However, Murderbot pretends to still be restricted by its code because it doesn't want to be impounded or whatever happens to rogue mechanical beings. In All Systems Red, we find Murderbot on what sounds like a pretty mundane assignment as a security robot or a sec unit for a planetary survey team. But there's corporate shenanigans going on, and the crew that Murderbot is supposed to protect finds itself in grave danger because maps of the planet are blank and there's a mysterious secondary survey team. Anyway, Murderbot, who just wants to zone out and watch soap operas, has to kick into action and help the survey team solve the mystery. Now, this is a fun, short adventure, but it has layers. For instance, Murderbot is called Murderbot only by Murderbot. Anyway, that's how he privately calls itself in the first-person narration. Apparently, there's a serious malfunction in its past. We don't get a clear picture of what, but it ended up murdering a lot of humans. And maybe the repairs on it afterward is what made Murderbot self-aware. It's a very interesting premise. I really enjoyed this novella, and if you are into science fiction, short fiction, or mysteries, I strongly suggest checking it out. Of course, All Systems Red gets my blessing. The second novella I've recently read, which I got for Shelve It or Shove It, and I thought it was a novel, was A Psalm for the Wild Built by Becky Chambers. Now, I've never read anything by Becky Chambers before, but I know she is a well-respected science fiction author. And this is what I guess is a series of stories called The Monk and the Robot books. Now, this is what I call literary fiction or literary science fiction. Whereas All Systems Red was an action-adventure, A Psalm for the Wild Built is a slow-moving, introspective character study. One way you can tell it's literary fiction is it breaks a lot of the forms of commercial fiction. For example, the plot structure is quite different than what you may find in other novels. There's no 3-act or save the cat structure, at least not in the traditional sense. You can get an idea by the chapter lengths. The first 2 chapters make up about a third of the novel, and it's all setup. We don't even see the second main character, the robot. There is very little action. Yet, at least for me, the story moved quickly, and the writing, the prose itself, is very sophisticated. It's not flowery or purple, but it does have complex sentence structures, vocabulary, and imagery. Now, the story itself is about a monk, a non-binary monk named Dex, or sibling Dex. And sibling is their title, like a male monk is brother, a female monk is sister. A non-binary monk is sibling. Sibling Dex lives on a small planet called Panga, which has, in its recent past, gone through some sort of ecological catastrophe caused by technology. And back then, robots became sentient and went into self-exile hundreds of years ago. Now, humankind has isolated itself in one part of the planet and keeps itself contained so as not to disturb the planetary ecosystem. Robots haven't been seen in hundreds of years. Humans seem to have become highly evolved insofar as we don't see any driving ambition to conquer nature through greed or ambition or selfishness. So the setting of the novel is really a utopia, which is in and of itself a departure from the dystopias that most science fiction explores. But this, of course, begs the question, if you live in a utopia, how do you find challenges? Or how do you find meaning in your own life? This is what drives sibling Dex to leave the comforts of their monastery and become a tea monk, which is sort of an itinerant monk who travels from village to village performing a sort of tea ceremony and acting as a psychologist or counselor to anyone who comes and sits with them for tea. Now, the story is a character study of sibling Dex. What are they searching for? Why can't they find meaning in their life? Why are they so disconnected from the rest of humankind? Now, this isn't really a spoiler because you can read it in the blurb, but sibling Dex encounters a robot. Remember, robots are sentient and have removed themselves from humans. So this is the first human-robot encounter since the big ecological disaster. The robot is named Moscap, and it is an emissary of the robots to contact humans after all this time. Moscap is somewhat childlike and only seeks to understand sibling Dex. So once the readers, meet Moscap, a lot of the story becomes conversation between the monk and the robot. Now, this is philosophical science fiction, ruminating on the thoughts and desires of humanity that has reached a sort of utopia. It is a very sweet story. The main characters are super sympathetic and, at least for me, very engaging. Also, to remind you, this is a novella. It is a short read. I could imagine becoming bored if this was a full-length novel, but it is just the right length to tell this particular story, in my opinion. Of course, A Psalm for the Wild Built gets my blessing. If you've never read short-form science fiction, short stories, novellas, novelettes, and if you're really curious and want to delve into this short form, I highly recommend Dangerous Visions and Again Dangerous Visions, edited by Harlan Ellison. These are anthologies of science fiction stories published in the 70s, with stories by some of the most well-known science fiction authors of the time, including Kurt Vonnegut. Yes, Vonnegut is a science fiction writer. He said so himself several times. And a couple of these stories are award-winning, including The Word for World is Forest by Ursula K. Le Guin. Yes, that is a novella. Or just check out All Systems Red by Martha Wells and A Psalm for the Wild Built by Becky Chambers. I think it's really exciting that short form science fiction has been making such a comeback. Until we meet again, may all the books you read be blessed.